Could a simple shortage of silver have helped destroy the British Empire's control over its own colonies? In 1763, Britain emerged from the 7 Years' War victorious, but drowning in debt, over £130 million, with interest payments alone consuming the treasury. London needed revenue, and it looked to the colonies. But across the Atlantic, another crisis was already unfolding. Silver and gold were vanishing from colonial ports, drained by trade imbalances and imperial obligations. And what Britain did next to solve its own financial emergency would push its colonies toward the breaking point. In the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, Britain's treasury faced a reckoning. The ledgers in London told a story of victory bought at a staggering price. By 1763, the national debt had soared to over £122 million, nearly double what it had been just 6 years earlier. Interest payments alone consumed more than £4 million each year, a sum that rivaled the entire peacetime revenue of the British state. The government's annual deficit hovered between £5 million and £7 million, forcing the Treasury to borrow relentlessly from London bankers and Dutch financiers, who now demanded higher returns to offset the growing risk. Inside Parliament, the mood was tense. Ministers like George Grenville and the Duke of Newcastle pored over balance sheets, searching for ways to bridge the fiscal gap. The Commons echoed with calls for new revenue. Grenville, in his 1763 budget address, declared that the Empire must contribute to its own defense. For Grenville and his allies, the colonies across the Atlantic were no longer distant partners, but a potential solution to the crisis. The Treasury's own calculations showed that customs, excise, and land taxes at home could not cover the swelling interest on the debt. Colonial resources, they argued, must be tapped to restore fiscal order. Proposals poured in. Some ministers favored direct internal taxes, like the Stamp Act, which was projected to raise over £1 million a year from American legal documents and newspapers. Others pushed for customs duties on sugar and tea, hoping to collect another £2 million annually. Even land and property assessments were considered, though these quickly ran into resistance from colonial assemblies. In committee rooms and cabinet meetings, the debate turned on how far to push the colonies, and how quickly. Treasury officials warned that the market could not absorb unlimited new borrowing. By 1764, yields on government bonds had climbed to 5%, and city bankers like Sir Richard Glynn cautioned that, without fresh revenue, British credit itself might falter. The pressure for results was relentless. The East India Company, facing higher customs on tea, warned Parliament that increased duties would depress sales and disrupt trade in the colonies. Merchants in London and Bristol sent letters urging caution, but the numbers left little room for comfort. Britain's debt-to-revenue ratio now stood at nearly 12-1, far higher than those of France or the Dutch Republic. The financial survival of the empire, in the eyes of many in London, depended on extracting more from its American dominions. What began as an accounting crisis in the Treasury soon became a political imperative. The search for revenue was not a matter of choice, but of necessity. For the men balancing the imperial books, the colonies were no longer just a source of trade. They were now the key to Britain's solvency. The stage was set for a confrontation in which economic survival and imperial authority would become inseparable. Drained silver and gold moved out of the colonies through channels as steady as the tides. British ships arrived in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, their holds packed with cloth, glass, and tea. Payment was demanded in hard money, Spanish silver pesos or British gold coins, handed over at the wharf. Customs manifests from the 1740s and the 1750s show these imports, priced in sterling, matched by debits in colonial silver. Each crate of Manchester broadcloth, every chest of Bristol tea, meant coins leaving colonial hands, rarely to return. The outflow did not end with imported goods. Colonial merchants and planters, many already indebted to London creditors, faced regular demands for repayment. Probate inventories from the era list debts, sometimes thousands of pounds, marked for settlement in silver or gold. When bills of exchange matured, hard money had to be shipped back to England, regardless of local scarcity. Merchant ledgers from Boston firms like T and J Jackson record monthly remittances of £12,000 to £15,000 in specie, steadily thinning local reserves. Caribbean trade acted as a powerful siphon. Sugar plantations in Jamaica and Barbados needed constant infusions of silver to pay for British goods and cover customs duties. Shipping records from Charleston and Savannah detail regular shipments of specie southward, sometimes entire cargoes of Spanish dollars bound for Bridgetown or Kingston in exchange for molasses and rum. The West Indies, always hungry for coin, drew hard currency out of the colonies in seasonal waves. Customs summaries from New England ports charted the highest outflows in late summer and early fall, timed with the sugar harvest and peak trade. Bills of exchange, the paper backbone of Atlantic commerce, never replaced metal. Each promise to pay was ultimately settled in silver. When a New York merchant drew a bill on London for a tobacco shipment, the obligation was clear: settle in Spanish pesos upon receipt. Ledgers from Cadwalader and Company show ships dispatched with silver to close out these debts, draining reserves further with each transaction. The cumulative effect was a steady, measurable loss. Port books from New York between 1764 and 1774 document over 12,000 shipments of specie, averaging 260,000 pounds per year in hard money leaving colonial hands. Philadelphia's customs returns record a peak outflow of 300,000 pounds in 1769 alone. By the 1750s, the balance had shifted. Boston, New York, and Philadelphia all recorded negative net silver inflows, their coffers emptied to meet imperial and commercial demands. For merchants, the arithmetic was unforgiving. Each season, they watched silver reserves dwindle, forced to choose between paying British creditors, buying new stock, or extending credit to local farmers. Clerks, factors, and ship's captains became agents of a system that funneled hard money outward, leaving only paper promises and mounting arrears. The vulnerability was structural. As long as the colonies depended on British goods and borrowed from British lenders, their silver would continue to flow away. Colonial America's daily economy ran on a fragile mix of hard coin and locally issued paper. Spanish silver dollars and British gold guineas were prized, but few ever stayed long in the colonies. Most slipped away through trade, debt payments, or vanished into the West Indies. What remained to grease the wheels of commerce was a patchwork of paper, bills of credit authorized by colonial assemblies, circulating from hand to hand in markets, taverns, and among farmers settling debts after harvest. This paper money wasn't simply a lifeline, it was a lifeline. Assemblies in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and New York printed bills to pay for roads, militia, or public buildings, then allowed them to circulate as legal tender for private debts. The total volume was small by modern standards. Franklin's 1749 tables counted just 81,500 pounds in bills circulating in Pennsylvania, with similar figures in New England. But in a world where metal coin was always scarce, these bills filled the gap between what colonial trade drained away and what daily life required. Merchants relied on this system to keep their doors open. When a Boston shopkeeper sold goods to a farmer, payment might come in a mix of local paper, British copper, or even a note promising future delivery of grain. Franklin, ever the empiricist, compiled ledgers and price tables to show how this blend of paper and coin kept commerce alive. His data, shared with the Pennsylvania Assembly and later with Parliament, revealed that bills of credit were not wild experiments, but carefully managed tools. They rose and fell in value with the colony's needs, and their quantity was often adjusted to match the ebb and flow of trade. Colonial assemblies, wary of inflation, imposed strict limits on how much paper could be issued. A bill passed in Massachusetts in 1751 capped new emissions at 50,000 pounds, with all notes scheduled for redemption within 5 years. Franklin's own proposal, the Land Bank, offered a plan for stability. Issue paper backed by mortgages on real property, providing both a source of credit and a guarantee of value. Though London dismissed these ideas, Franklin's tables and arguments caught the attention of both colonial and imperial policymakers. He insisted that, without a steady supply of circulating medium, trade must stagnate and the poor must suffer. For farmers, paper money made the difference between selling crops at market or watching them rot in the barn. In the absence of coin, a bill of credit could purchase seed, settle a debt, or pay a laborer. The system was imperfect, discounts and disputes were common, but it allowed a cash-starved economy to function. When Parliament began questioning the legitimacy of colonial bills, Franklin's records became central evidence in the debate. His tables, published in the Pennsylvania Gazette and cited by the British Treasury, showed that the colony's paper emissions were modest, their value stable, and their necessity plain. This delicate balance, hard coin for foreign debts, paper for local exchange, was the foundation of colonial economic life. The loss of either side threatened to tip the colonies into paralysis. Franklin's advocacy, grounded in tables and lived experience, was a warning: remove the paper, and the remaining silver would not be enough to keep commerce alive. The colony's monetary system was already stretched thin. The looming threat of imperial restriction would soon reveal just how vulnerable it had become. In April 1764, Parliament passed an act that would send shockwaves through the colonial economy. The Currency Act, introduced under the authority of George Grenville, struck at the heart of daily commerce in British America. Its text, direct and uncompromising, declared that no colony could issue new bills of credit, paper money, intended for use as legal tender in private debts. Existing colonial notes, already circulating in markets and taverns, were to be withdrawn and redeemed in hard coin if they were to be honored at all. The statute's prohibition clause left little room for ambiguity. It stated no bill, note, order, or other paper currency shall be a legal tender in payment of any private debt, contract, bargain, or sale whatsoever. This was not a technical adjustment, but a sweeping ban. For merchants and farmers who had relied on local paper to pay debts, hire labor, or purchase goods, the law meant that only gold and silver, already vanishing from circulation, could settle obligations. Grenville's rationale was laid out in his speech before the House of Commons. He argued that colonial bills had depreciated the public credit and injured the value of sterling money. To Grenville, the colony's habit of issuing paper money had become a threat not just to British creditors, but to the stability of imperial finance itself. He insisted the faith of the empire is at stake. Let us restore the soundness of our currency, and with it, the honor of our commerce. Enforcement was swift. Royal governors received directives instructing them to halt all new emissions of colonial bills and to ensure that only British coin or Spanish silver would be accepted for taxes, court fees, and private debts. Merchants who had extended credit in local paper suddenly faced the prospect of collecting in specie, or not at all. Farmers, who often paid their suppliers after the harvest with bills of credit, were now told that only hard money would suffice. The Act's reach extended into every corner of colonial economic life. Shopkeepers in New York and Boston posted notices refusing paper notes. Court records show a surge in lawsuits as creditors demanded payment in coin that simply could not be found. A Maryland merchant wrote to his London agent, "Trade is at a stand. No man will part with silver, and paper is now as good as waste." The Currency Act did not merely reform the colony's monetary system, it removed their last practical defense against the relentless drain of silver and gold. By outlawing the most common tool for local exchange, Parliament transformed a chronic shortage into an outright crisis. What had been a delicate balance of paper and coin now collapsed into scarcity. The Act's legal language, shaped by Grenville's fiscal anxieties, would soon be felt as a stranglehold on colonial prosperity. The economic consequences would ripple outward, touching merchants, planters, and laborers alike as the imperial search for solvency crossed the Atlantic and landed with full force in the daily lives of Britain's American subjects. John Hancock's ledger for 1764 tells a story written in red ink. Pages once filled with steady payments now show a rising tide of UN-paid invoices. Over 30% of his receivables for the late summer and fall months remained unsettled, triple the rate just 2 years before. Hancock, one of Boston's most prominent merchants, faced a market where silver was nowhere to be found, and paper bills had lost their legal force. His accounts list familiar names, shopkeepers, shipwrights, even distant planters, each marked delayed, no coin, or simply left blank. The chain of trust that held colonial commerce together was breaking, one missed payment at a time. In Virginia, the crisis reached from the counting house to the tobacco fields. Inspection returns from Williamsburg and Norfolk show a steady decline in prices, 6 shillings and 2 pence per pound in 1764, falling to 5 shillings flat by 1767. Planters who once sold on credit now struggled to find buyers at any price. With British creditors refusing anything but hard coin, many were forced to barter or accept deep discounts just to move their crop. The loss of paper money meant the end of easy credit, and with it, the collapse of the seasonal cycle that had sustained rural life. Courthouse records tell the next chapter. In Boston, debt suits jumped from 84 in 1763 to 127 just 2 years later. Virginia's county courts saw similar spikes, with over a 50% rise in cases of unpaid obligations. Merchants who could not collect turned to the law, but silver was in such short supply that judgments often went unenforced. For farmers and tradesmen, a simple transaction now carried the risk of ruin. The liquidity crisis was no longer an abstract policy debate. It was a daily reality, measured in lost sales, falling prices, and the slow suffocation of colonial commerce. Debate spread from counting houses to colonial assemblies, where the economic scarcity was no longer just a matter for merchants and planters. In Virginia, the House of Burgesses received a petition in 1766 that spoke plainly of the danger. The scarcity of silver renders all public and private obligations impossible to discharge. The plea called for the repeal of the Currency Act, warning that the commercial lifeblood of the colony was being drained by imperial policy. Similar words echoed in Massachusetts, where assembly records describe a general distress among honest traders and a growing fear that the crown had abandoned the needs of its distant subjects. Newspapers fanned the flames, and the theme was strangulation. The Boston Gazette ran columns accusing Parliament of economic strangulation, arguing that the Currency Act was not a reform but a weapon, one that choked off trade and left honest men in ruin. The phrase appeared again and again. Strangulation of commerce, suffocation of credit, the breath of trade denied. In Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania Gazette warned that the law would bind the colonies in perpetual debt to the crown, urging readers to resist any further impositions on their livelihoods. Colonial officials sensed the danger. Thomas Hutchinson, Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, wrote to London in 1766 that the shortage of silver had fomented a restless spirit among merchants, who now whisper openly of extra-legal measures to procure the credit so denied them by Parliament. Hutchinson's correspondence described not just hardship, but a change in mood, a restless willingness to challenge imperial authority if relief did not come. In the span of 2 years, economic pain had become political grievance. Assemblies and the press drew a straight line from imperial debt and monetary restriction to local suffering, and finally, to the legitimacy of British rule itself. The road to revolution was paved not only with ideas, but with the hard realities of a financial system pushed to the breaking point. Today, the logic of liquidity still defines the boundaries of power. When policy turns currency from lifeblood into a chokehold, ordinary people bear the cost, with merchants stalled, farmers cornered, and commerce frozen. The American Revolution warns that economic desperation can upend even the mightiest empires. In every financial system, scarcity breeds unrest, and history reminds us that change often starts with the coins in our hands. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.